We began yesterday just laying a foundation for what we wanted to do in lecturing. And in lecturing, that can be with one person, it can be with a small group, it can be with a large group. And our goal is that you know the material at about a 10% level, because we don't want to kill the creativity in you. And as you begin to learn these diagrams, and some of you have learned them and you've used them, you see how you can add your own information to them and your own revelation to them. The first thing we looked at yesterday is that we have to have hope. Do you have hope that Christ is enough? I became a Christian, was told Jesus was all I needed, and ever since then, nearly every day, some Christian has told me that Jesus wasn't enough. And there's additions and additions and additions, and Christianity is without a doubt the ugliest religion in the world, isn't it? Because it was never made to be a religion. It was made to center around a person. And I don't know if you have the same problem that I have, but still, at this point in my life, after 25 years, 30 years in teaching abiding life, people ask me, what is abiding life? And I go,
I'm glad to hear that.
because the problem is, I want to introduce you to a person and not a doctrine. If we had a doctrine, it'd be very easy to say what abiding life is. If it was all about discipleship, if it was all about a prayer ministry, but it's all about Jesus. And that takes time to introduce a person to Christ and to understand themselves. But I have hope, because after all these years, I believe there's nothing the nearness of Christ won't fix in your life. And that we draw near to Him and we see what it is to be in Him. And we see what it is to have His life, and everything begins to change. Do you know it's interesting that people allow their past to control them all the time? Well, the one past that ought to control you all the time is the past you have with the Lord. Your history with the Lord should be controlling you today, because every one of us in this room has a history with God, don't we? And He's brought us this far, and we didn't even intend to come this far. And He's brought us on this path, and we didn't intend on this path. And so it's really a wonderful thing to draw back on my past when things are at their very worst, and my history often carries me when nothing else does, and I can't see anything else around me. I was in the mountains, and I like to go up there and have a retreat, and I decided to take a break. I was exhausted, and I got a book on a missionary, and I thought, well, I'll read about this missionary. And I started reading the book, and he had an incredible life. Do you know this missionary almost sinned when he was 13, but he went to the women's Bible study, and they prayed for him, and he didn't sin. And I started reading his book, and it was just a straight path, and the miracles that took place, and how God used him, his favorite phrase, and worked through him, and how God did all of this. And I could just see a throne here, and I could see the man here, and his path in life was on that straight and narrow road right straight to the throne. Do you know, the more I read the book, the more discouraged I got? And I just sat there reading it, and I got angrier and angrier and angrier, because the desire of my heart would be to be where he was at age 85. But I haven't had his past. I haven't had his experiences. It's too late for me. I didn't do everything perfect. I didn't run to the women's Bible study when I was 13. And so that life isn't for me. And I finally got up and I threw the book in the trash and said, well, blow that. And just went for a walk. And that night I came back and I was meditating, and while I was meditating, the Lord gave me a vision. And I saw a path, and there stood the man at the beginning, and I saw him at the end at the throne. And I said, yeah, that'd be right. I know that. I read the book too, you know. And so I keep praying, and then the Lord says, well, let me show you your path. And I look at my path, and it twists around, and there's logs over it, and there's rocks and landfall, all these kind of things going around, and my path's like this, and it goes all over the place. And I said, I know that too. I said, Lord, you tell us to earnestly seek the gifts. Why don't you start with encouragement? And I said, I know all of that, and I didn't want to think about it anymore. And the Lord just said, now, let me show you something. And He took me from here, and He put me there at age 85. And I said, you can't do that. How can you take me on a crooked path and me end up at the same place with a fellow who went down a straight path? And he spoke and said, I can do anything because I'm God. Do you know He can take your crooked path and make it intersect with a straight path? That He can use everything that's taken place in your life and make sure that you intersect there, because that's the desire of our hearts? I want Him. I was born to die. I'm not in a panic over death. People are dying all the time. They're supposed to die. But before I die, I want to know what it is to have Christ in me, the hope of glory. I want to know who He is and what He did and why He did it and how He's working. And I have a history with Him, and my history is going to carry me. I know no matter how twisted it gets, He's going to take me there. I have hope. And so the main thing we're talking about is having hope. Do you have hope? Do you really believe that when Christ is someone's focus, things change? And that has to be the overriding goal. It has to be working under the surface all the time, that I'm pushing you in that direction. I am not pushing you to me. Our goal is not to have people addicted to us. I don't want them to come away. I had the best conference ever in Oklahoma. I went there and the people said, we've never heard of you. And when I left, nobody had ever heard of me. All they were doing was sitting around in groups talking about Christ. They weren't talking about Mike. And I just came in, shared Christ, left with Christ, and that was perfect. That's our goal. We want to point people to Him, not to us. I don't want an addiction to Mike. It's not true there's nothing the nearness of Mike won't fix. It just isn't true. And so we want to push that. We're looking at hope. Then we're looking at examining and probing our ways and turning to the Lord to understand how God made you. Because we need understanding in order to have revelation. We have understanding, and then we have the move of the Spirit, and that brings us revelation. And so I want to understand how you act and why you act that way, what your self-life is, what your flesh life is, what does it mean for you to take up the cross and deny yourself. And we looked in yesterday that man is born self-centered and insane. He doesn't have an identity and people give it to him. Then you spend your life trying to change it. You're born without God. You have a false concept of Him, so you run from Him and you develop your idols. And in the end, your life is a daily hell. And the Gospels become this. We want you to accept Christ so you get out of hell in the future. That is not interesting to a lot of people. It's not of interest to them because they're living in a daily hell. How does He get me out of that? We're trying to improve this life, and what He wants to do is remove it. And I get a brand new life, Christ's life in me. Christ in me, the hope of glory. So we're going to start out, and we're going to take the lectures, and we'll start looking at each one of them, each one of the diagrams. Now, as I look at these diagrams and I go over them, this is when you get to take some notes. But I don't want you to take any notes until I tell you to take a note. Okay? That's it. I'm being legalistic. Why do you always have to bring the truth into this? Grace is ended now. You got to follow my plan. All right, we start with this diagram. Listen to me. Just listen to me give the diagram. This tree represents your life. All of these branches are different problems. Now, you've come in with this one problem, and we can focus on that problem. And I know it's a legitimate problem, and it's a real problem, and it's why you came. I'm not discounting your problem. I want to come back to your problem. And you've told me that the problem is your kids. Here's an issue, though. How do you address a storm outside of you when there's one inside of you? If you don't have peace inside, how do you deal with turmoil outside of you? And so I want to talk about your problem. But before I do that, I want to look at some root issues. Because there's something in the root that will feed your problem. And if we get rid of this problem and the kids finally graduate and leave home, but we haven't dealt with the root, I can promise you the sap, the power of the tree, will go into another branch and we'll have to deal with it. And your whole life you'll spend dealing with branches. I want you to deal with the root. So I want to take a minute and look at root issues. All right, now, in one sentence, write in your notebook what I just said. All right, somebody read me their sentence.
you work on something that is not the root, it will only strengthen another problem.
Okay.
The problem's not the problem.
Okay. Okay, now here's my point. All of you are saying the same thing in a different way, aren't you? And so now God is working through your creativity and your uniqueness, not mine. So it's very important to me that you have your uniqueness and you don't abandon that. You've said the same thing, but you've said it in a different way. And you caught the spirit of the diagram. Now, that is what you want to communicate to the person in this diagram and in the lecture hall. This is what you want to communicate. How you get there is your own business. But you now know what the key thought is, and just as there's a hub of the wheel, you can go to that hub in a variety of ways. You're all saying it a little differently, and you all heard something a little differently. God will put the people in your life that you can minister to. I discovered this. I was in a counseling ministry, and I watched the secretary book in counselees. And the way she booked them in was whoever had an open slot. But do you know she always booked the right person with the right counselor? That when you're with a group or you're with a person, you're the very best person for that group or that person because you're the one that God put there. And I remember sitting in with one of the counselors, and he'd been with a lady for 6 months counseling her. And she was having an indiscreet rendezvous. And I'm sitting there, I'm from Kansas. What's an indiscreet rendezvous? And so the wheels are turning up here, and I'm wishing that I had my dictionary, and I don't have that, but we're talking indiscreet rendezvous, and she's really worried about her indiscreet rendezvous, and they've been talking about it for 6 months. And finally I got up and I said, hey, I figured out what that is. I said, it takes a while, but I got it sorted out. And I went to the whiteboard and I wrote in big letters, horror. And I said, that's what you're doing, you're whoring around. And she says, get that off the board. And I said, I didn't put it there. She said, well, you just wrote it. And I said, no, I didn't. You wrote it because you're the one doing it. It's not an indiscreet rendezvous. It's whoring around. This counselor turned absolutely pale. And you just see he was pale sitting there. And I said, if you don't want it, you get up and erase it and shift direction. And admit where you are so you can leave where you are. But I said, the thing is, God delivers people all the time from whoring around. But I've never heard of Him yet delivering anyone from an indiscreet rendezvous. He doesn't do that. He doesn't deliver people from alternate lifestyles. He doesn't do that. Admit what it is and get on. And she started weeping and said, I don't want that. I said, then erase it and give it to Him. And she did. And in that area of her life, there was a conversion. And I saw her move on. The Lord had me there that day for a reason. I don't want you to abandon your uniqueness. So as we go through the diagrams, you're going to describe them in your own unique way. But we're going to get the main idea. Okay, so now you have a sentence for this. You could sit and describe that diagram to someone else, couldn't you? Well, what we do right here is you start out, and I want you to be thinking, I want you to understand this at a 10% level. I want you to be able to lecture the whole notebook in probably 2 to 3 hours. Now, as you mature in it and as you work with it and as you add your own material, it'll get to the place where you can spend the whole night on this one diagram. So if you ever want to experience that firsthand, sit in on one of Ray's lectures. Because you can be in for a week and maybe not get past this diagram. So you can do that and you can add to it, and I want you to add to it. Nothing's copyrighted, you just copy it right. As soon as you copyright Revelation, it's the last revelation you'll have. These diagrams have come out of me working with thousands of people trying to clarify what it means to have Christ in you, the hope of glory. So we have that diagram. So what we've set up now in this is that there are root issues, right? So now we go to our next diagram. I want to give you an idea of what some of the root issues might be in your life. When God created you, He made your body out of the dust of the earth. He breathed His Spirit, and you became a living soul with a mind and a will and emotions. Adam and Eve were told the day you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you'll die. They ate from the tree. They had to be dead. God tells the truth. But they kept walking in their bodies and thinking and feeling and doing. So where did the death take place? It took place in the spirit. Now that caused a problem. I'm created for God to be the source of my being. But I don't have Him as a source. He needs to be my source because He needs to meet my needs. Why do we have a source of water? So the water can meet my need. He had to be my source to meet my needs for love and acceptance, assurance, security, those kind of things. But I don't have Him. So I begin to look to other people to meet my needs. And the first problem that I have then, being dead to God in the Spirit, is that I'm completely self-centered. All that matters is me and me getting my needs met. And most of the conflict we have with other people has this at its roots. You didn't meet my needs. You didn't love me. You didn't accept me. You didn't give me assurance. You didn't give me security. You didn't give me commitment. We're self-centered. There's a lot of symptoms of a self-centered person. They can't be taught. They're too quiet. They won't shut up. On and on and on. You have all these symptoms of somebody who's self-centered. Okay. Write a sentence. What did I just say? Okay, let me hear somebody's sentence.
God created us spirit, soul, and body, and when we fell, our spirit died, leaving us self-centered in our moving, living, and doing.
Great. Now we go back, and I just start back here again, which is what you'll be doing when you're lecturing. I go back, and I say this. Your problems are like branches on a tree. And we can deal with the branches and keep cutting them away, but we haven't gotten to the source. And I want to look at those branches, but first of all, I want to look at the source that feeds them. Because if we don't get to the source, the branches will keep coming. So we'll take a model of man where there's spirit, soul, and body. You were born to have God meet your deepest needs in the spirit. You were born dead to God in the spirit, and therefore you're looking to other people to meet your needs, and you're very, very self-centered. Now you see how you flow those two together? And you begin to see the progression of it as you go along. Now we go to our third diagram. And I want to explain what religion looks like. Because religion is an attempt to get your deepest needs met from the outside in. And so it's something you can do in the world, something you can do in your body, your mind, your will, your emotions, or even something you can do in your spirit. But if you're dead to God in the spirit, that's where you end up in the demonic. So there are people that look to the spirit to meet spiritual needs, but it's the wrong spirit. Now, every single person then is religious. So what is your religion? And of course the obvious question is, has it failed you or not? And so anything I'm given to do from the outside in is religion. What makes Christianity different? It comes from the inside out. Out of my innermost being will flow rivers of living water. That if He could do something in my spirit and meet my needs, then that would flow through my mind with a renewed mind, and through my will, and through my emotions, and through my body, and into my world. What is your religion? What is the thing you're looking to meet your needs? Is it ugly things, drugs, alcohol, pornography? Is it your family, your job, your vocation, knowledge, wealth, or just flat out religion? These are all things that you'll look to meet your deepest need. And they don't meet your deep need. They just leave you craving for more. And I want more and more and more. So Pascal said this, there's a God-shaped vacuum in the heart that only God can fill. If you try to fill it with something other than God, it will never be filled. It'll only feel emptier, and you'll feel more frustrated. So you'll try to fill it with more. And more and more and more. But you'll continue to be empty, and your appetite will actually go up because you're trying to fill a chasm. And you think somehow I'm going to get this chasm filled through these religious things. And I can't fill the chasm. If He were to fill it, then of course appetite drops naturally. if he meets my need. Okay, so we've done 2 diagrams there, and what we're doing is we're emphasizing and building on what it means to be self-centered. So what is self-centeredness? I said you're born dead to God in the Spirit. You're self-centered. You're looking to other people to meet your deepest needs. That is another phrase or another way to describe religion. Religion meets my needs from the outside in. What is your religion? He wants to meet it from the inside out. And until He fills that gap, you'll continue to crave things that you believe are going to fill this for you. The first problem you have is being born dead to God and then self-centered. Okay, write that out in 2 sentences. Yeah, 2 sentences. So give a sentence for each diagram. All right. Somebody got a sentence for the first diagram for this one? How did you see that? What did you hear? What would you want to communicate in it?
Religion meets my needs from the outside in by trying to meet my spiritual needs through the world, my body, my soul, or spiritualism.
Okay, great. So it gives you a good definition of what religion is.
Yeah.
And a distinctiveness in Christianity. It is not a religion. How about the second diagram? What does that tell you?
But
Yeah, okay. All right.
the more you try to fill those needs, the emptier and more frustrated you become.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right, see my progression in here then as we go along. You came in with a problem that's like the branch of a tree, but there's something feeding the problem. That's at the root. We want to look at what the root issues are. And we'll begin by looking at a model of man. You're created spirit, soul, and body. You're dead to God in the Spirit. You're looking to other people to meet your deepest needs, and that's frustrating you. And that's making you self-centered. And it's making you religious. And all religion is whatever you look to from the outside to meet the deepest need. And it won't meet that need. So now we've got back to a real root issue here. And the more you try to make it meet the need, and we say this over and over again, that insanity is doing the same thing that doesn't work over and over and over again. Yeah, and you're not going to get a different result. And so this is insanity to keep trying to fill this gap. How many years have you been trying to fill the gap in your life with your mate, with your vocation, with your church, with those kind of things? What are you trying to do? And you can't get it filled. So the first point I want to make is that you're self-centered. Okay? See the flow of that? Now, as you go along in lecturing, just one thing I'll mention. Pray without ceasing. Now, praying without ceasing is not an action, but it's the recognition of a connection. So to pray without ceasing is not an action, but a recognition of a connection. Everything in abiding life is a recognized truth. It is not a created truth. That's a distinctive in what we're teaching. Now, the word that's hardest to translate in any language in the whole Bible is the word abide. And almost every language will translate abide as remain. And so if you remain in me, I'm sure that's what it is in Spanish, remain. Abide in, remain. And so we always translate it remain because abide is such a difficult word. The best word to describe abiding is the word recognize. So read John 15 or 1 John today, and everywhere the word abide is, put recognize. If you recognize me and I recognize you, it's done. See, it's really nice. It's not a work I do. In that sense, it's a recognition of a work that He's done. And the moment I recognize the work He's done, His work becomes my work. And so we're going through a series of recognitions. You're already complete in Christ, but you don't see it yet because you don't recognize it. You're near to Him, but you don't recognize it. The day I prayed without ceasing was the day I realized I was praying without ceasing.